Friends, Atlanteans, countrymen, we are gathered here today to get through this thing called Fathom. Now, let me make my position clear. We are talking today about the work of Michael Turner, who left this earth aged 37 in 2009. He died young, he died of cancer. It is a tragedy. And of course, many people remember him. Friends, family, fans. Fair enough. He leaves behind his work, and to engage with work is to be respectful. At least to engage with work in good faith is to be respectful and to honour the contributions to life that this person left behind. This is a critical podcast. It is also an ethical podcast. We are not taking cheap shots, but we are taking the pictures that we see. He lived unlike anyone, he lived imperfectly. That's fine. But if it will bum you out to hear a less than absolutely complimentary retrospective on this man, then perhaps you will want to move on without listening. We offer honest appraisal in respect for our honest interest. So, if that is agreeable to you, let us commence. Now, Fathom is not an easy comic to read, and that is because Michael Turner is not a flawless storyteller. The basics are thus. Aspen Matthews is a marine biologist working in an undersea lab when she suddenly discovers she has water powers. At the same time of this discovery, she is met by some underwater people who would like her to join them in some light terrorism against the surface world and its people. And it turns out that she is one of them. She is not of the surface world, though she has lived there for as long as she can remember. We struggle to make these things clear in the episode because we struggle to glean them from the book. It is just not incredibly effective at getting across the story it had in mind. But it's ineffective in ways that are intriguing and notable. Now, a second apology, and this one is personal. I was running late this issue, and I did not have my notes with me, so I believe, my memory tells me, that I somewhat dominated the conversation in an attempt to keep all the things I was storing in my mind clear, and to get them all into the episode. I apologise for that to Tegan and to you, and rest assured that we have since recorded The Darkness, and all my notes were present. I will never sin this way again, thank you. Please enjoy Fathom. Recording. Right, Tegan, tell us about your night.
Oh, well, my night was largely spent trying to keep the cat from knocking down piles of comics or scratching comic book boxes to heck and gone.
Always Roger.
I had to go through and find all the Michael Turner, and I have a good couple inches of Michael Turner that I sort of flipped through. I read the first couple issues of Fathom, which I'd never done before.
Me too.
I thought you'd read Fathom before.
I had read 2 or 3 I'd read issue 12. I own issue 12. I'd read some sort of crossover that involves like some other crossover that involves Fathom, and I had seen a lot of adverts in the backs of the issues that I was reading in the early 2000s, but I'd never actually tried to read Fathom on purpose.
On purpose?
Because it does take a certain amount of effort.
Well, I actually was surprised. I found it a very readable book. I thought that it actually did a fairly good job of setting out its premise. I don't think the premise was particularly original, but if that's your cup of tea, I think it did a really good job of laying out like, okay, this is an underwater adventure. There's someone who's going to go to a magic underwater realm and encounter all sorts of like handsome underwater men. And
yeah, I see what you mean. Like it does, as you say, set out what it is if that is your cup of tea. And that's like kind of a hard line for me because like catering to niches is cool. But I would like to see I just wish it was better. Like it's not as bad. Like To be real, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. I did not think that Fathom would be readable at all because the various vague issues that I've read have been completely fathomable. But like seriously, they have. I could not figure out what's going on. All I knew, there's a girl and she's wet. That's it. Um,
Well,
and
I've
these
read some, and that does seem to be more or less the takeaway. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Like that's just not enough for me. And the it's like to draw an easy comparison. It's not as good as the first issue of Witchblade. We talked about that last time. Witchblade issue 1 is a solid issue. It's genuinely decently written. Fathom, not so much. It's not as bad as I thought it would be, in that it does have like just the basics, I suppose. Like there are characters introduced, there are premises introduced, like you said. I'm grasping because that's it. Like it's very, very basic, and it's very. It feels quite regurgitative in that.
Everything is laid out with a lot of deliberation, and you can tell that there are a couple of movies, a couple of bits of pop culture that maybe
Yeah.
influenced it. Like if you haven't, for instance, if you haven't seen The Abyss, directed by James Cameron, and I believe was that 1990 or whatever. If you haven't
Mm-hmm.
seen that, a lot of it will be new to you.
Which I haven't. I have not seen that, and I also haven't seen Top Gun, but I can
Yeah,
sense them in the water, and the water is everywhere in Fathom.
I had never seen an underwater dogfight before. That is something new.
Hmm.
That comic book showed me was, an airplane dogfight only underwater.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. That is a plus. Like that's something that Michael Turner can deliver in a way that like you'd be very lucky to find that in film. Like even now, it would take a certain amount of work. Like in the 90s, people were saying, um, you can do things in comics that you can't quite do in movies, and it would be pretty much correct. Like it would be much more believable to see an underwater dogfight in a comic book than it would be in a movie because the effects just wouldn't have been there. But like that's all that Fathom really offers. Like it gives us a bunch of Michael Turner, but it doesn't give us really anything else. Like you mentioned the array of hunks, right? We talked about that in Witchblade. The Fathom hunks are not as good. They're not delivering. Because they're not different kinds of people, and they don't represent different kinds of like hunkiness, I guess. Like there's not they're not as well managed. Well, like they don't represent stuff in the text as well as in Witchblade. They're just like a bunch of guys, and none of them really do anything or say anything or have any personality except one guy who I hate. And if there's someone I hate in a comic book, you've got to do a lot to get me past that.
which one?
Which one do you think?
Uh, I will see. I honestly don't know because having read the first like 3 issues, I haven't really seen that much. There's the big. I guess is his name Killian, who's sort of being played up as like Namor, but I don't know, more sexy. um, Sexy's sort of always been kind of Namor's thing to begin with.
But now he's got long
Um,
hair. Oh, I guess Namor had that already.
yeah, he's had that. He had that long hair. I remember in the '90s for a while.
Well, now he's got like I don't know, Michael Turner. No, I hate Jack. That was his name, right?
Jack. Okay,
Who like see the thing is
the normal-looking dude.
the normal looking dude. The thing is that Fathom number 1 is really similar to Witchblade number 1, but
Yeah, a
not
little
as
bit.
good.
Yeah.
And Jack is the Jake. Their names are even almost exactly the same. They're like the normal guy who's fairly handsome in a normal way, but because there's all these other supernaturally hot guys around, he represents the fact that the main character is like too good for this world. She's extra.
Yeah.
And in Jake, that's fine because he's kind of hapless, he's kind of cute, like he's nice, he's helpful. He actually likes her.
Plus, he's part of another. He's a connection to another milieu because he's more. I mean,
Right.
the thing is that Sarah, we don't actually see her being a very, very good police officer at any point. Like whatever
Right.
you think good police, is, it's not what she's doing.
True,
So it's
true.
good to know that there are other people around who can sort of bring her into the plot and be like, hey, maybe we should catch that microwave killer at some point.
Right, right. Yeah, so Jake is someone from work who she
Yeah.
has to work with continuously. Like he has to be there and he's not too bad. But Jack in Fathom is horrible. He's Aspen. Aspen is the main character. I thought her name would be Fathom. It's not. Fine. He's Aspen's
You thought
ex-boyfriend,
her
and he
name was just going
sucks.
to be Fathom?
Well, yeah. Like, there's if you see a lot of pictures of this wet lady with the word Fathom above her head, you associate them. And I don't know what her name is. That's Fathom. Like that's Savage Dragon or whatever. Like people, I know he's not Savage Dragon, but people think he is because he keeps seeing the figure with the words. Like that's just how the brain works, the associative nature of the juxtaposition. So yeah,
Okay,
I thought
I
she would be
get that,
called
yeah.
Fathom. I think that's very reasonable.
You know what I was
um,
confused by was the fact that the first issue doesn't really end. It just sort of
mm,
stops in the middle of a sequence.
it does, yeah, and that's annoying.
I did because I turned the page and there's like a 2-page preview for the next issue, but it's like, wait a minute, are we done? Was that the story?
We're
There's just
done.
this very phallic torpedo heading towards the sea lab. And you can definitely tell this was 1998 because there's not a single Sea Lab 2021 joke anywhere.
But Jack, like in the first issue, is just the annoying guy that you would get at that time. Like people thought that it was cute for a guy to be annoying, I guess. Like he doesn't take anything seriously, and he clowns around. And she broke up with him in the past because of his bad behavior, non-specific. We don't know what it was. Yada yada. Then in issue 2, they get torpedoed by accident by one of the other hunks, and I thought he was going to die. I really thought he was going to drown to death, and it was going to be like he was annoying for a while, but then he was sorry, and then he died. And I was like, okay, fine, I can forgive his presence, but he didn't die. He's still around. So there's nothing redeemable about this. This is just an
Well, if they
unattractive, horrible person bothering the main character as if that adds narrative value in some way, and it doesn't, and it sets me against the whole thing.
he has an air, about him of, and I realize this is 25 years ago. 25 years ago, I just said that 1998. Wow.
Mm.
My goodness. He because it's, a quarter of a century ago, we didn't really talk about like nice guys. He definitely seems like a very, archetypal nice guy. You know what
Yeah,
I mean by that?
yeah, I do, and I hate him.
This issue, there's the ad on the back for the. Were we talking about the Witchblade soundtrack on tape before?
I
There's an
don't think
ad.
that we were.
Maybe we were talking about that in DM because there's an ad on the back of the Fathom #1 I have for Songs of the Witchblade. We should probably do a whole episode just about that because it's
Absolutely.
it's got a great late '90s lineup here. People from the Melvins and Typo Negative. I also love the. Do you have a copy of the issue, or are we reading along online?
I don't have it in the room with me, no.
They have mine has these great. All of the top cow books from this period had these great action figure ads for these
Mm.
toys that I don't remember ever seeing. Like this Ian Nottingham with like a silver blouse,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the Fathom statue. This Fathom statue looks like something they probably made a very big deal out of.
Yes. Um, an interesting thing about the Fathom statue,
Oh,
and
you
this
have
is,
more information about it.
well, if it's the same one, because I was looking at an
Arthur
advert
Moody.
for a Fathom statue the other day. It wasn't in the Fathom comic, it was in something else, and I can't remember what, and I can't find it again, but it was one of my other top cows on the pile, so it'll come out. But um, it's sculpted by his mum.
Really?
Yeah, by his mother
Oh,
Grace, a sculptor,
interesting.
who also, by the way, the
That's who
first issue
Grace
is
is.
dedicated to.
I was just going to say because I just saw the. Maybe we should read it here for the audience.
Yeah.
On the inside front cover of Fathom #1, for Grace, for your many creative contributions to Fathom in both characters and concepts have been invaluable. Our long conversations over cheap wine and Cheetos, When the story began to take shape, it was the brainstorming sessions with me sketching and you sculpting, and me
Mm-hmm.
pacing and you typing, and both of us in fits of laughter that make the genesis of this book one of the great experiences of my life. Genetics made you my mother, but who you are has made you my best friend. Oh, God, that's too much.
I
Or
know. Isn't that just
how can
delightful?
how can you hate this comic book with the
Well,
guy?
it's just not very good, Tegan. Like, it's fine in several ways, and I bless,
I wasn't
the
saying you hated
memory.
it.
But it's like, with all critical respect, I can't say that it's more than it is. I do love that story though. Like, that has equal value to me as like an artifact of 1998. Like, the idea of this guy hanging out with his mum and having a good time, like, that's delightful.
None of
That's
the
way
other.
better than like than a lot of stuff that this publishing house put out at the time.
Oh yeah, I mean, and you can definitely tell. I think because I mean the fact is they ended up putting out a lot of Fathom comics, especially after he. And that's, I guess, something we'll have to at least allude to is, he ends up
Yeah.
leaving Top Cow. There's some acrimony
Mm-hmm.
um, over that, which I think is a little bit, uncharacteristic of the firm. So, interesting for that. But you can definitely tell, this is something that the creator had a lot of, feeling for, a lot of, put a lot of himself into because it's got a lot of his, interests. Um,
Yeah.
which is like we're saying here, it's not something you can say for every. It's not something you can say for every of the image books, and you can definitely tell. I mean, we've already talked about this. Like Savage Dragon, you can tell as a concept, labor of love. Cyberforce, maybe not so much.
Yeah. But Fathom, I mean, the fact that when he did leave Top Cow, which is jumping ahead maybe a little bit, it was with Fathom, and I think for Fathom, and the fact that Top Cow wanted to keep Fathom so badly, I think was what caused some of the trouble. Um, but he took it to Aspen, which just makes it even harder for me. He called his company Aspen, the name of the character. Aspen puts out Fathom, which does Aspen. That's too much. Yeah, but Aspen has put out several volumes of Fathom, like an alarming amount of volumes of Fathom since it was founded, and in fact, since the death of Michael Turner as well. They're still trying it. Um, it's a concept, a character, and a property that has really devoted fans,
You
because
know,
it is their cup of tea, like you said.
I was talking to my realtor, not my realtor, my retailer, my comic book retailer, who's been in the business for a very long time. So I've been taken to picking his brain about this stuff. And the thing about Aspen as a business is that they're very hands-on with retailers, hands-on around the con circuit. So that's a lot of their stuff is more or less directly in touch with their fan base, like who getting covers that are convention exclusives, doing the
Yeah,
convention circuit. Um, uh, a lot of very very direct hand selling of this stuff with retailers that they want to get their product, and sometimes the books don't sell. But you
yeah,
order them because you want to get this, whatever exclusive they have, because you got like one or two guys in the shop who really, really, really never gave up on,
right.
the Michael Turner experience, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's also and I don't know did I ever tell you this? I think I told you. Because I asked a
Mm.
couple people I knew who were into like water characters.
Yeah.
And this is a thing that I wasn't really like quite with because I knew some Aquaman fans.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really like understood why Aquaman fans in some degrees like they almost seem like a breed apart because it's like their guy has never been that cool, but they'll, ride or die. And the Aquaman has this, really, strong kernel of readers who love him and will have like, an all Aquaman pull list at their shop. And there's one or two guys like that in every shop, or girls too,
Right.
because it's this thing that I didn't really understand,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like there are just some people out there, normal people who are just ocean people, and they really
Yeah.
like the ocean, and
Yeah.
they like watching movies about the ocean, they like reading books about the ocean. They go to the store and they get Aquaman and they get Namor and they get Fathom too, because Fathom
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
was one of those books that was directly, aimed at that audience. Like if you like water, if you like wet, if you like wet, this is the book for wet. And sure
Yeah.
enough, that's what it gives you. And I can sort of relate to that because, like I say, I'm never really that big into Aquaman, but I always like space stuff. I always
Uh-huh.
like, we're never going to get to go to space or anything, but you can sit down and you can read Silver Surfer, and it's like, oh, a book about space. That really makes me happy. And I guess I can sort of understand it on that basis, like, oh, it's people who really just want to be, living next to the ocean in a lighthouse so they can see the mermaids come in. And that's a
Uh-huh.
whole thing for them.
I just like that's very lovely. I do like that a lot. I just sort of wish it was better for them. Like I don't want to totally bury Fathom because I see like that it has an appeal. Um and I can see even like with the mother stuff, right? Um and as an adult, it's much easier to perceive Fathom not as um a pervert book, which is what it seemed to me as a teenager. It just looked like a book where someone just wanted to draw a lot of wet boobs. Um, but I
Well,
don't think that it is. I don't think. I mean, there are wet boobs in it, but it. I don't think that's what's completely driving Michael Turner as a creator. I don't think it's even like a very large proportion of what's driving him as a creator because it's not a very large proportion of the books. Um, and it's interesting that I mean obviously he did want it to be like he did have ambition for the quality of the narrative because otherwise he wouldn't have hired someone to co-write the script with him. So I can respect that and like trying like knowing what you want to draw as an artist is a troubling thing I think in the comic book industry because you don't really get much of a choice most of the time. If you when like because you have to take what you're assigned. You can go for stuff, you won't necessarily get it, and if this is your job, you need to take a job eventually in order to feed your family or whatever. So if you get to be in the position of Michael Turner, where you've launched an incredibly unexpectedly successful book like Witchblade and got like a hardcore ride or die audience out of it, then being allowed to do exactly what you want and trying to make it good, like that's the dream. And it does kind of bum me out to have to say it's not as good as it should have been, but them's the breaks. Um, I wish that like the stuff that he really wanted to put forward was really being like supported and valorized by the rest of the creative content. Because looking at what he does want to draw is interesting because like a lot of it is men in jewelry and like cool, sexy water men. And I it's hard to talk about because when we're talking about something from like Y2K, all of the Y2K social baggage comes with it. So it feels like wrong somehow to be like there's like a homoerotic something to like that's not even what I would want to say. Like I don't want to be like Michael Turner draws like he's horny for men because I that's not really what I feel. But he doesn't draw like he's like afraid of people who are horny for men.
Well, no, I think he definitely shares that with Mark Silvestri. Because,
Yes.
at no point in the history, in Mark Silvestri's history, he's always liked from the very beginning drawing sexy ladies, but he's always in all of his books, very equal opportunity. He
Yeah.
draws probably, and I'm all right. I will just say I'm not, into men, but I can recognize that he goes out of his way to draw Wolverine sexy in a
Mm-hmm.
way that not every artist does.
Yeah.
But when he went back to do New X-Men with Grant Morrison, what is the most famous piece of art from that whole thing? It's the one with Wolverine sitting there in those tight jeans, and you can see every detail of his butt.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, that's
Yeah.
not an unsexy picture of Wolverine. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily like every picture of Wolverine is sexy.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually, while I was reading Fathom, I was asking myself, like, why didn't they let Michael Turner, or why didn't they make Michael Turner draw the darkness? And the only reason I could come up with is that he would make him too fucking hot. Um, Legitimately, like, because we haven't got to him yet, but because the darkness has such a sexual element to his like power and that like his character, like being too adorned looking, like it would just be too close to the bone, I think.
Superfluous, even?
Well, not to me.
Okay, okay.
No, but like, so looking at the way that he draws in Fathom, Michael Turner. The thing that I find myself thinking is that the difference in how he draws, like there he does seem to have more of an interest in these issues in drawing the like majestic adorned men than he does the similarly adorned women. And I don't think, like, because in the Y2K sense, that sounds like some kind of bizarro accusation, right? Like if we go back in time, if you talk about a man drawing men, it's like you're calling him gay and that's a bad thing. But if we can like step outside of the past, if that's even possible, like I think that his greater interest in apparently drawing men than women is that men are allowed to look more craggy, and therefore you're allowed to use more lines. Because when you get spreads of like all of these undersea people together and like their bottom halves turning into bubbles, the men take major precedence in the image, but so do the bubbles. Like I think that he just wants to keep drawing, and when he's drawing his women, because he draws these dolphin women, they have to be smooth, they have to be turgid. Like that's what the people wanted at the time. Like that's what was coming from like the porn and the softcore and everything. Like being shiny and smooth was the
That
woman's
was,
like lot. Like, because you know how the 90s guys love to draw lines. Like everyone's always taking the cheap shots at Liefeld, like just chuck a bunch of lines on. You don't know where, they just put them on. It's a legitimate observation. There were a lot of mark makers in the 90s, and Michael Turner is one of them. But he does have like the propriety to put them only in places that they are really functional in. Like he likes to outline shapes and topography, and like he draws like a map maker in a way. Like he'll show you how the body is coming out and how the jewelry is overlapping, and like all of the like underwater. They were like coral looking body harness things. All of the lines are doing something. Like they are all actually delineating. It's not just visual chaff. And it feels to me that the big hunks are offering more opportunity for that kind of rendering than the more waif-like females
well, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much drawing 101 when you're talking to anyone. It's like, every line you add to
from the 90s.
well, if you open up like Bern Hogarth, probably they'll tell you every line you add to a woman's face adds like 5 or 10 years to the character,
Yeah,
for better or for worse. I mean, that's the shorthand,
largely for worse.
and it doesn't quite hold. Well, well, if you're teaching cartooning, that's one of those things that is pretty basic front and
Oh,
center.
I know. Like this is something that has truncated my growth as a cartoonist, absolutely. That idea that you have to not do as much detail or refine yourself on, like, that stopped me from drawing for like 12 years. That
Oh, really?
horrible lesson. Yes, because it's offensive. Um, there are ways to affect the implication of vitality and beauty that do not like divide themselves on such basic and punishing lines. Like I follow the argument from the books and so on, but like it's sexist. Like it just is.
I'm not going to argue with you there. I'm not going to argue with you there. It's just how our eyes pick these things up because of how we're conditioned by reading comics for decades, and like you say, definitely for worse. And but you look at a lot of women drawn by a lot of artists, and you'll see
Mm-hmm.
most of their lines are on the woman's hair.
Yeah.
Or, as I've taken to noticing with Silvestri, all the way back to his King Conan days. Like, if he's drawing a page, he'll draw everything like it's supposed to be. But then if there's a woman with a nice dress, he's obviously going to put most of his rendering time onto that, like, evening gown in a way that
Mm-hmm.
you can't really say for most artists who go out of their way. What am I trying to say? Or most artists go out of their way not to render the finer details of women's clothing
Yes.
because
Yeah.
they have no feel for fathom or
Yeah.
for fashion for that. um,
That's
or
another
like,
way that Turner is like Silvestri, in fact, that he does put detail into clothing and outfits. He will do that due diligence.
well, we were talking last time, and you were tracking down the dresses they were wearing in the early run
Yeah.
of Witchblade.
Yeah.
Um, whether or not it was supposed to be a specific dress, it was obviously something that was um, informed by what was going on in the fashion houses at the time.
Yeah.
Especially later on as the book, they get into the world of modeling, which I'm sure has little resemblance to what, the real world of modeling actually looks like. But at least some attempt was made to give them clothes that weren't completely awful looking.
The this is kind of a tangent, but on the subject of Michael Turner potentially making the darkness too sexy, because kind of like coming back to Michael Turner as the guy.
Well, he did draw him for a few issues as a crossover.
That must be true. That must
I
be
got
true.
it. I have actually the trade that they put out at the time for the Family Ties storyline.
Coming back to Michael Turner as the guy who debuted properly Witchblade, who began the series, who carried the series for how many, like 20 issues?
25
Maybe?
issues,
25
because
issues.
the first
It's really
issue
a solid run.
well, yeah, the first issue of Fathom, I think, ships the same month as Witchblade 25. So it was a big deal.
Oh, did he go like directly from one to the other? That's interesting.
Yes, directly. And that was, looking back on it, that was the really big push. Like, oh, he did 2 years on this title that you
Yeah.
love. He's got his own book, and that
That's like a
it
big
launched really well.
reward. Yeah.
It launched really well considering it was 1998, which was the time that, well, the industry was kind of struggling. It was not the time to be launching a new property of any kind unless you really had it in. And at that point, Michael Turner had the juice.
Yeah.
He was one of a handful of I guess you'd say the second wave image guys. Certainly, you can put him next to like the Wildstorm guys, like J. Scott Campbell. Um, the people who really came out of the books, not the books, the studios that
Mm.
the image founders made and came up through that. He was one of the most successful of that crew, and he's maybe the only one of those guys who didn't get sucked into video games. Not to be casting any aspersions on Battle Chasers, for instance. There should, I think, be many more issues of Battle Chasers in the world than there are. I actually kind of like that comic, but I think there's only 9 issues of it that were ever made because the guy liked playing video games. That was the rumor at the time.
um Well, I can't comment on Battle Chasers.
Yeah, it was definitely of its time. Definitely stuck in its moment in the late 90s.
Talking about Michael Turner as a or even the Top Cow guy of the 90s at least. The way that that his work on Witchblade differentiated Witchblade from the from the rest, but also from like the previous Top Cow attempts at series establishment, is in the romance. We mentioned that, but the way that that Sarah the Witchblade, which he has to take some credit for because he developed the visuals, the way that she springs out of Top Cow's previous attempts at establishing series, like the aesthetics in play, bring us once again back to Mark Silvestri at Marvel, in my opinion, because I think there is a very basic and bold and undeniable lineage of like motif down from Marvel through Top Cow, Witchblade. Would you like to hear about it?
I would love nothing more.
Okay. So, as you said, Mark Silvestri draws Wolverine looking sexy. Now that is something that reared its head immediately in the Top Cow milieu. Even before it was Top Cow, because in the first series of Cyberforce, we meet new character Ripclaw, who is essentially, like visually, Disco Lobo.
Disco Lobo?
Yes.
I don't know what I was expecting you to say, but I don't think I was expecting you to say Disco Lobo.
Well, that's what he looks like to me, and I'm all for it. But his power, his power. Do you know what his power is?
He's got, I've read Cyberforce recently, and if it's not just blades out of his hands, I don't know what it is.
It is just blades out of his hands. But I mean, actually, in more specific terms, is that he can like turn his hands into like bare hands or something, because it's supposed to be like
because of the Native American culture.
We're doing like cliche aesthetic stuff.
As opposed to the guy from Wildcats who turns his arms into knives, too. He's not trying to be a bear.
Exactly. But the thing with Cyberforce, we're going to have to do an episode on Cyberforce, just because I have so many mean things to say about it that I'm starting to feel unfair. Like I have to read it properly and see if there's anything in it. But so Cyberforce's thing is that the mutants, and they do call them mutants,
yes,
in the book, have mutant powers, but their mutant powers have all somehow been amputated and replaced with metal ones by the baddies. So anyway, Ripclaw could turn his hands into sharp knives, but now he's got metal hands that he can also turn into sharp knives. So he's got sharp knife metal hands. Much, you might agree, like Wolverine.
Yeah, so his powers are basically Edward Scissorhands, only assumedly he can go to the bathroom by himself.
Right. What if Wolverine was Edward Scissorhands? Then, after him, only marginally after him, but he didn't get this new guy. He didn't get his own series until 1995, and that's where I found him. Killraiser. Are you familiar with Killraiser?
Killer is... Okay, I want to say like that sounds like the name of a Savage Dragon villain, but I think I'm thinking of something else. Who was Killraiser?
It does sound like that. It sounds like any generic bad guy from any comic publisher of the time. But it's not. He's a hero. He was a member of Strike Force,
Oh yes,
which is a
Codename Strike.
spin-off of Cyberforce.
And I realize since you mentioned that, I should say in a previous episode, I mentioned that Steve Gerber had written Cyberforce. I don't think he wrote Cyberforce because I was checking, and he did write some of the Codename Strike Force. I think I was getting it
Right.
mixed up because there's a whole lot of those books that I have absolutely nothing to do with. Codename Strike Force, I'm sure we'll get to it eventually.
Oh, absolutely. How could we miss it out? So Strikeforce, I think, is exactly the same as Cyberforce, except it's a different book. By which I mean, I think that they all like because the lead guy Striker, I
Strike,
think,
yeah, he's got the three arms, which is
is
actually
from Cyberforce.
yeah. And I think the Strike Force, isn't that just like his more hardcore mercenary group or something? If I
Yeah,
were
we could do the like X-Men equivalents, but we don't need to. We're above that. So yeah, so Striker, his mutant power was having three arms on one side, and then those were cut off and replaced by three metal arms on that one side. And now he leads a team called Strike Force. And on that team called Strike Force are a bunch of people, and one of those people is Killraiser. And Killraiser's thing, I have been unable to discover whether this was originally organic and then amputated and then replaced by metal. It's not clear to me. I will do the work and find out before we cover this. But so far, it's just up in the air. So his power is that sharp bits come out of him everywhere.
oh
He looks like what do they call it? Iron Spider, where it was Spider-Man wearing red and gold with like
oh
extra
yeah, and he
gold
had the
bits.
yeah.
It looks like
I
that,
absolutely
except
hated that costume.
yeah, except the gold bits like come out of him. So he's just got like spiky insides that burst out. A bit like Marrow, but not like Marrow. But also he's got these gauntlets, right? So if he has the spiky bits come out of his wrists, then they don't rip his costume. So most of the time he just uses wrist blades, but it is coming from inside of him. And at that point, I think, because obviously, like this is a bunch of boys. I think that having spiky stuff rip out of you from the inside was a little too much, a little too Saint Sebastian for the vibe of the time. Like things
Oh
bursting out of people in Alien makes people realize that it's some kind of abortion metaphor. So
well, yeah.
I think people were a little uncomfortable.
I just googled the guy, and yeah, there's definitely more body horror than I would have necessarily credited. Early Top Cow with going for there.
Right. So I think the brilliant idea that they had was make it a woman. Because then we just expect it. We expect body horror with women. We expect autonomy being subsumed and things bursting out of them and, chests in peril and such. It was the time of women in refrigerators. So then we get Sarah, where things burst out of her all over the place, often and largely starting at the hands, sharp hands. And instead of coming out of her flesh, it just rips off all her clothes. It's like a very easy turnover, like period of experimentation from Wolverine down through a few iterations until they hit their own perfect form, which was sexy girl with knives on.
Well, I mean, you can't do better than that.
Well, you can, because they got married.
Who got married?
Wolverine and Sarah Pazzini.
Oh yeah, so that was the they did two Wolverine Witchblade crossovers. The
They
first
did.
one was part of and I was reading through the first one, which is Devil's Reign, where basically it didn't seem to have much of a plot other than Mephisto comes from the Marvel Universe to just sort of like fuck with the Top Cow people for no
Yes.
reason. And then the second one is the one that might actually turn out to be more interesting, even though it's not drawn by Michael Turner. The first one's drawn by Michael Turner, and it's a very well-drawn comic book. I don't know who drew the second one, but it's written by Chris Claremont. Is that the one I'm thinking of?
Yes, it is.
And for some reason, Chris Claremont had this habit when he went back to do more Wolverine stories in the years after 1991. He was always getting Wolverine hitched because he did it when he did a Wolverine, I think it was like 97 or 98, he did a big return to the Wolverine solo book, and he was like, oh, he's marrying the Viper. And then it's like, oh, he's marrying Witchblade. Like, well, why didn't you marry Wolverine when you had the chance?
He missed the chance, and now he's scrambling to make up for it. Yeah. Well, should we do that one sometime? Probably.
Yeah, sure.
But we shouldn't talk about it too much now because it's Michael Turner's day and he deserves it. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that Aspen MLT Productions, which is the publisher that Michael Turner founded after he left Top Cow.
MLT standing for Michael Lane Turner, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Yes.
They are still going today. They're still a comics publisher. They're keeping at it. And they definitely know that they have the water people to watch out for, because they have tried a number of approaches. They've put out several volumes of Fathom.
You were showing off something of theirs that I had never seen before. What was the name of that weird book? It
was called Trish Out of Water, which is a fairly cute title.
Trish Out of... Yeah, that is a cute title. What's it about?
It is about... it's basically Fathom again. It's about a teenage... She's teenage, though, so she's younger. And blonde. It's about a teenage girl who is so popular and has a great life, and her parents are cool and sexy too. But then one day she comes home and they're murdered, and then she discovers that she has power over water, and then she discovers she's secretly like the queen of the undersea people.
But isn't that Fathom's deal?
Yes, it is. It is. It's exactly the same. I think it's a slightly different set of, like, different water. I really don't know. I skimmed it. I didn't like it very much. And partly that was because, well, I mean, I guess entirely that was because it's not drawn by Michael Turner. And without Michael Turner's art as the pull, like his ability to express the feeling of enjoying the water through drawing dolphin-like people and shiny droplets, and like his attention to detail is the whole of the draw for Fathom. Like he can draw wet hair. That's not very easy. And the people who have been following him at Aspen, on the whole, cannot. I looked at, I flipped through like the last issue of the last Fathom thing that they did. And the last few pages, it's just a military comic book. Very, very strange choices, but it shows Fathom on the beach. I mean, Aspen, on the beach, like looking out at the water and like thinking about how, you know, this is all behind her now or whatever. I think they're trying to finish it. But her hair is blowing in the wind, and it's not the vibe. It's like Fathom Aspen. In every scene that we see her in those first two issues and everywhere else, her hair looks wet. She goes for the wet look. Like that's something you can do with grooming products. It's a choice that you can make. See Kim Kardashian at the Met Gala a couple of years ago, if you don't know about that.
It was a big thing in the 90s. Big thing in the 90s.
Right, exactly. He was like almost near the button. And if you can't do that, if you can't express the tactility of this imagined experience that you're offering through a comic book about the sea, as you say, we can't be under the sea. We can't live as mermaids. Like, we're trying to reach something untouchable through the medium of looking, and through Michael Turner's ability to suggest those feelings and those tactilities and like just this imaginary sea dream world. If you can't do that, then why are you even doing that? You know, the art in Trish Out of Water by Giuseppe something, I think, an Italian artist. Anyway, I see why they chose him, because he is aping Michael Turner's style of drawing eyes specifically, mouths largely, and dry hair often. But he just doesn't have the same preoccupations. And when he draws the undersea people, he doesn't care about drawing the body jewelry. He doesn't care about drawing the feeling of being largely nude in the water. Like when you get a spread of sea people in this comic, the boy at the front has like a full arm and torso shirt on, and the armor and the body harness stuff, they're just shapes. Like it's such shorthand, it's such basic shorthand of saying, remember when Michael Turner drew that? It's not actually trying to get you to what Michael Turner was trying to get you. It's just trying to get you to the experience of remembering reading Michael Turner.
Yeah, that strikes me, frankly, as well. I was going to say problem, but just the condition of a lot of the Aspen books is they're building a whole house around this one guy's style, and he was a beloved guy
Mm-hmm.
who everyone who worked with him really just seemed to love him. But there's something distinctive about his work that you're not going to get unless you're actually him.
Yeah.
That, like you say, the fascination with all the little details that he puts into what he does. And no one else draws all those little details. No one else is going to go to the trouble of drawing, Ian's shirt, or not. No, yeah, Ian's shirt. No
Yeah.
one is going to go to the trouble of drawing that silly looking shirt that isn't going
Speaking of
to.
that shit, sorry to just butt in for just a moment. Like, keep what you've got in mind. But because you mentioned that shirt so much last time, remember that I found that shirt in real life.
Oh God, that's right, you did. Where did you find it?
It was in Vogue. It was Chanel Autumn Winter 96, which means Michael Turner did it first.
See, the thing about that shirt is it's the kind of shirt that it amazes me that it existed in the real world, because it's the kind of thing you can imagine a dude seeing in the store and thinking, I'm going to look great in that. It's like, no, you're not going to look great in that. No one outside of a comic book is going to look great in that shirt.
Or Vogue. But yeah, carry on with your initial.
Well, that's basically my observation there is I think it's kind of a hilarious shirt for that purpose. Like, unless you are just the most, you know, dreadfully handsome man in the world,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to look like a weeb.
Yeah.
And, no offense to the weebs in the world. The weebs make the world go around. But, they don't look as cool as they think they do. They just don't. And that's a beautiful thing, but it's the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, Michael Turner really committed. I mean, it's the romance that we talked about before. He commits to the evocation of
Style. It's a
yeah,
style.
style and like desire almost. Not really sexual desire, but desire of being. Like
Well,
imagining you're the kind of person who could wear this shirt, or imagining that you can live under the water. Like he deals in dreams. There's a
well,
mysticism to it almost.
I think that, and we've talked about this before because, we've talked about how, Top Cow isn't afraid to make men sexy,
Yeah.
and how, that's definitely a wish fulfillment, but it's not the normal type of wish fulfillment that you see for, well, it's like the disingenuous argument that people always make, like, well, having exaggerated female anatomy, that's not bad because we have exaggerated male anatomy. And
Mm.
then you sit down and think about it, and it's like, well, it's not exaggerated in the same way for the same reasons. It's not the same type of traits. It's one way of how men want to look to impress other men versus how men would want to look if they want to actually impress women, which are two different things entirely.
Mm. Or even like to impress other men that they want to sleep with. Because like you do get in, you know, traditional, air quotes, traditional like masculine comic art, there are like famous panels where like someone's butt looks really good, or where like someone's tied up in some way, like, and they do get like passed around and remembered and like venerated for being more than just the norm, like more than just the impregnable power fantasy. Because
Well, it was actually kind of a problem, I think, recently. There was some capital D discourse about whether or not they'd gone too far in terms of Nightwing. I don't know if you caught any of that, but people were saying, like, have we just turned Nightwing into like a sex object? In
yes,
essence, by just fixating on his butt for years and years and years on end. And that's
yes,
an interesting question, because at first it seemed like, oh, well, that's equal opportunity. But then it becomes every different artist is drawing Nightwing with, an exaggerated derriere until it gets kind of silly.
I, I mean, speaking as a non DC reader, I thought that's the point.
It wasn't the point until actually shockingly recently, I think since the turn of the century, because it was sort of like subtext before. And then sometime around the turn of the century, he had a couple runs that were really, I think he had a couple female writers actually who emphasized that and put it, in the foreground. And since then, it's sort of been hovering around his character more than most. I didn't know you didn't have any DC experience.
Well, I mean, I
Um,
have DC experience, I just don't really enjoy it. You know, I
well,
gotta
that's
read a
one
little
way of
here, read a
putting it.
little there. That whole universe just seems a little square to me. I'm
Well, it
sorry.
is. And in
I'm
fact, that
sorry.
actually, believe it or not, that actually leads into something I wanted to ask. And I don't know if you even have any interest in talking about this. But the thing with Michael Turner is that after he left Image,
Mm,
he started, he started work on Aspen, which was his own company. But
yeah.
he also started doing a lot of work for DC and then for Marvel as well. And I wondered if you
Oh.
had anything necessarily to say about the later work he did, because that stuff is very interesting, not necessarily for the same reason, maybe contiguous reasons, shall we say.
The only thing I remember is his Supergirl torso.
Yes, his Supergirl.
Well, actually, that's not true. The only thing I remember is his Supergirl, and half of that is his ridiculous approach to her midriff, which honestly I just perceive as like he does not understand. He does not understand how his image making can be perceived. I think that he thinks that he's doing something specific and doesn't realize that it is also um, doing other stuff to other perspectives.
But I also want to point out, and this isn't necessarily in defense of him, but simply to say, at the time, that didn't necessarily, it wasn't necessarily outside the range. And you can say, oh, the range was terrible. And it's like, yeah, it was at the time. But it was sort of like there was a cultural, movement around that type of well, I think of it, the Bush years as being very crass in terms of sexuality, because on the one hand, it was sort of a conservative time, but on the other, there was definitely this push towards sexualizing younger and younger and younger women in the culture in a way that I found really distasteful. And I was glad when it seemed as if we had moved on from that, but that seemed very much of a piece with that, movement in the culture at the time.
It
Um,
was, it certainly was, which was why it was such a problem. Um, like that's kind of what I mean, I guess. Like, so I think very often for the artists, the comic book men, um, they are working so much from the comic book perspective. They are so like immersed in the immediate legacy that they lose touch with everything else, and they don't see how what they're doing could be in any way like air quotes wrong, whether that's like artistically, morally, whatever. Because they're just working along a sequence. They're iterating it, like just like with the clause to clause to clause. It was like midriff to midriff to midriff, long waist to long waist to long waist. But it, as a, person with a waist, looking at it is it. I'm looking at it now.
And
Like at the time, it was oppressive, and it's still oppressive, and that's partly because he didn't really draw it very well.
She looks weird. His Supergirl
Yeah.
just sort of looks weird, and it's not, I don't think, I think that he was capable of drawing very sexy women. I don't think his Supergirl was sexy at all. She looks as if something ails her.
I do wonder, actually, if that is because he wasn't trying to draw her sexy. I feel like it's possible that he was simply trying to draw a teenage girl wearing a midriff top, which we were doing at the well, were we? What year was that? I mean, we had recently been doing
2005, 2006-ish, I think. Yeah, that was definitely when the...
Oh, no, in that case, totally wrong. The midriff tops were completely out. The tunic tops were in. We, like, the entire... Like, where her little yellow belt is where her top should be ending. That was the style at the time. But that's the thing with the comic book man iterating from comics. They're missing what's happening in, like, actual streets. Because we were iterating in the other direction, in the practical sense. Because waistbands got so low and that crop tops couldn't keep up. Like, everyone had to buy low-rise jeans because they were the only kind that was being made. And that meant that if you wanted to ever not wear a crop top, which most of the time most people don't want to wear crop tops, you have to buy a really, really long shirt so it actually reaches the waistband of your jeans. So tops became these horrible, apologetic tunic nightmares. Like, Empire waisted, I was having a horrible time then. I hated what everyone was wearing because it was so immediately responsive to the problem of, like, enforced midriff and enforced low rise. It was so apologetic, but it was what we were doing, or at least what most people were doing. So this like, it was a problem because his Supergirl was not, like, right. She wouldn't be wearing that. It was also a problem because her skirt is so flippy. She flies, for fuck's sake. But yeah, he's drawn it weird. It looks like a pork loin. Her torso is extremely long. But I think, like, to me, having looked at his work that is sexy and that is specifically for an audience that's supposed to be finding it sexy, I don't think he's trying to draw her as a hot girl. I think he's trying to draw her as a miner who is wearing a cute little outfit. And I think he's trying to walk a line between making that weird and making it not weird, and he's failing, but I guess I kind of respect the attempt.
The thrust of those stories was definitely, they were reintroducing Supergirl. She'd been this weird, Matrix character for, like 15 years. They were reintroducing Superman's cousin as Supergirl. And those stories, for what they were trying to do, and we can look back and say whether they actually succeeded. But what those stories were trying to do was to introduce her as something resembling an actual teenage girl. So what you're saying makes total sense in terms of that. But I think there was a bit of a slip between the cup and the lip, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because it didn't really come across quite as much. I mean, there's a couple rather infamous scenes of her, like, walking around with Clark, like, oh, let's go shopping or whatever. And it feels a little bit forced, but mainly only because it's like, well, this is men in their 30s and 40s who are trying to act like they know what teenage girls actually talk like in 2005, 2006, which they probably didn't.
It feels to me very much like an editorial problem, because Michael Turner should not have been deployed for this, because he had established himself as a hot girl artist. Like, even though it's not really fair to say that he was only drawing the girls hot, like, that was how he was perceived at large because we were so homophobic pilled at the time. He was considered a guy who draws girls looking sexy, women looking sexy. Why would you put him on a book that is about a teenager being a teenager? That's ridiculous. Like, everyone is going to perceive it as you trying to create a sexy teenager, and that's weird, guys.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And, I was reading the books at the time, and yeah, pretty much, pretty much. And, the thing is that Supergirl didn't really come out of that very well. After the Turner years, they didn't really find a good hook. They kept changing her character every few years. So it didn't really stick what they were trying to do in any event.
That's a shame. One thing I think I remember is I don't know if it was Michael Turner. I did remember it as Michael Turner, but I just did a brief Google and I can't find it. I think he had her wearing like a sweatband, maybe once or twice.
You mean around her head?
Yeah,
Well, Supergirl did that in the 80s.
she did, but I think he brought it back, and I remember that someone did. Someone definitely did, and I remember it because it did actually look contemporary. Because it like a very minor blip. For a very minor blip, girls were doing that. Like not many, but some. It was like it was adjacent to the emo the scene thing with the hair over one eye and the puffy hair. It looked confusingly contemporary because I didn't associate that kind of actual observation with those books. And I remember people making fun of it and saying that it looked weird. And, like, sure, it did, but it was something that was happening. And if that was Michael Turner, then good for him. And if it wasn't, then good for whoever it was. But it's interesting. If it was him, it's interesting that he was portraying things that were actually happening whilst also doing the exact opposite. There's just, like, I guess there's so many different when you're making corporate comics, there are so many different people to please. Because it's one thing to draw contemporary, age-appropriate outfits, and it's another thing to have those recognized as such by the people who are in charge of you and probably looking even less than you are.
Yeah, well, you can tell when there's someone on the creative team who actually knows how people look, how they dress, or even just how, how cloth falls on when you're sitting down in a shirt. You can tell. You can totally tell when someone actually knows what people are dressing like. And, maybe at that point there wasn't anyone in the room who, I don't know. We could probably talk. We could probably talk at some point later just about that whole period because perhaps a note to end on here is just the observation, since we're talking about his DC work, that when he came over to DC, it was a big deal. He had been doing Fathom for years, and in a situation like that, you can easily imagine, like, well, he went off to do his creator-own book. Maybe he didn't have as much heat, but it's like, no, they put him on one of the biggest books they had. They had him doing covers for Identity Crisis, which was a terrible story. Don't want to talk about it, but it was huge. It was their big initiative, and they had Michael Turner covers for it. And then a couple years later, he turned around and he did covers for Civil War from Marvel, which was, one of their biggest launches of all time. So obviously, he was still selling comics. He was still a draw up until pretty much the day he died.
Yeah, he was. I mean, yeah, that is a great note to end on. I guess the only thing that I could think to accompany that is this like tiny, straggly, non-specific detail from an interview I did with Matt Hawkins a few years ago, where he said that he joined Top Cow in 1998, right? He's still the guy in charge there. In April of 98, Top Cow offered me a job, he said, and I took it. And the reason that he went there was that he thought they were at the top of their game, whereas in fact they were starting to fall apart. Michael Turner wanted to leave in 1998. And his job at the time, it seems, was primarily about keeping Michael Turner and David Finch and Joe Benitez and other guys who had been there and didn't want to be there anymore at Top Cow. And he did that for a couple of years, and then he stopped being able to do that, and off Michael Turner went, and that's how he
Well,
got
and
Aspen.
off David Finch went, and he had one of the, and I'm sure we'll probably do a show about David Finch at some point because
Yeah.
he went on to have one of the biggest. He was one of the biggest artists in the industry for the 2000s. After he left Top Cow, he couldn't have been any hotter.
Yeah. It's just such a shame that it was cut short by cancer and death.
Yeah, he. I was looking at that. I was actually reading, and if anyone wants to actually know more about the grim details here, I recommend going back and reading Tom Spurgeon's obituary. I actually did that
Yeah.
right before we recorded the show. He
Yeah.
did a very, he was very, very good at writing obituaries, and he went down the whole thing. And it just, you see, he died at the age of 37. And then I had that thought, like, my goodness, I'm significantly older than 37.
Yeah.
And he had cancer for many, many years.
He did,
And it
yeah.
impacted everything he did in the later years of his life,
Yeah.
apparently.
I think that he, I mean, that obituary quotes Sean T. Collins a number of times, which surprised me, I must say, but I guess it shouldn't have. Who I
He used
think
to work at
wrote,
Wizard. He worked at Wizard for like 10 years.
yeah. It seems that he edited some kind of Michael Turner special for Wizard.
Yeah, I got to get that.
If anyone has that, send me the scans. But yeah, he seemed to imply that there was much more Fathom specifically and his other titles that Michael Turner really wanted to be doing in those years in the 21st century. He just wasn't able to because of his illness, and that's really such a shame, because the fact that Aspen still turns over that engine every couple of years, like, he would have been doing it, he would have been winning.
Well, the thing that stuck with me from that, reading that obituary, was talking about how up until the very end, he was working with younger artists,
Yeah,
trying to get their careers launched. And that was one of his conditions, apparently, for cooperating with a Wizard special was, oh, you got to give my protege some space, too. And it's like, yeah, okay, I can see how people would still be loyal to a man if that was his attitude.
yeah,
I definitely can.
yeah. I think it's just such a shame that, as far as I'm aware, he really never got to work with a great writer.
In this industry, that's, you know, yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that. He never had, like, he's, certainly never worked with, Alan Moore or anything like that. Um,
Such a like specific talent, um, not being able to make any really great comics, like from all sides, like something really, really solid on all pillars.
well, that's sort of a disease that a number of the Image people have. Even some of the better artists to work through Image, you can look at them and say, well, they were really good at what they did, but how many truly great comics did Todd McFarlane ever do? Like, well, you're kind of fudging the numbers at that point.
Well, what a depressing ending I have made of this one.
Well, it is a depressing ending. It's not it doesn't have a happy ending. We can just look at what he built in the short time he was here and be really impressed with that. Like you say,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
an engine that's still going down the road.
I do find, looking at his work, that I can take things from it. Like, I don't love everything about it. I don't have like total recommendation for almost any of it, but I do have recommendation. Like, he's worth studying, he's worth looking at, he's worth appreciating. He's an interesting worker,
Yeah.
in ways that I did not appreciate as a teenager, because I found the glossy turgidity threateningly off-putting. But that's
Well,
circumstantial. So
this is
I am now in
also
a different circumstance.
I'm absolutely certain that this is not the last time we're going to discuss them because we're going to be talking a lot more about Witchblade. I'm pretty sure. So
We are. Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
But next week, I believe
What are we doing next?
it is time to enter the darkness.
Oh, we're gonna do that. We're doing the darkness before Tomb Raider.
I think we are because he comes straight out of Witchblade,
Yeah.
and Lara is a good way back in.
Alrighty, that sounds like a plan.
Super duper. Well, everybody, come back then.
Come right back around, you hear?
Moo.